February 15th, 2023, 11:47 p.m. A fire. A car engulfed in flames. The smell of burning flesh. Some called it a tragedy. Others knew better. A woman's body lay inside, unrecognizable. The car belonged to a man who preached about faith, loyalty, and righteousness. Pastor Malachi Graves. A husband. A father. A shepherd to his flock. But tonight, there were no sermons. No confessions. No mercy. What happened on this road wasn't an accident. It wasn't love. It was something far worse. You belong to me alone. Welcome to True Crime. Fire spread fast. Too fast. Malachi Graves stood there, watching the flames consume everything, the body, the car, the evidence. Janelle Carter had played him. Lied to him. Used him. Now, she was exactly where she belonged, in the driver's seat, burning along with every trace of what she had done. He had made sure of it. He dragged her body back inside, doused her in gasoline, soaked the car, and struck a match. One flick, and the night lit up in a wall of fire. Windows shattered. Heat warped metal. The smell of burnt flesh filled the air. Malachi didn't flinch. Didn't panic. Instead, he pulled out his phone and calmly dialed 911. "I need to report a stolen vehicle." His voice was steady. He thought it was over. He thought he was free. But the fire wouldn't be enough. And soon, investigators would uncover everything. Before we continue, to truly understand what led to the flames, the betrayal, and the crime that shook an entire community, we must go back. Back to the very beginning. Pastor Malachi Graves wasn't born a killer. He wasn't even born a preacher. He didn't just wake up one day and decide to be unfaithful. It was ingrained in him. He grew up in a home where his father was the unquestioned authority, the so-called alpha male. A man who saw faithfulness as a myth. A man who saw cheating as a man's inheritance. "One woman is never enough for a real man," his father would say, flipping through the pages of the Bible as if it were his personal excuse book. Abraham had more than one. David took whatever he wanted. Solomon had hundreds. Malachi grew up watching his father justify his affairs, watching his mother cry in silence, and watching everyone pretend it was normal. That upbringing shaped him. And so, as a man in his late 40s, he had everything: a beautiful wife, Naomi, 2 children, and a congregation that worshipped him. He stood in the pulpit every Sunday, preaching about loyalty, faith, and the sacred bond of marriage. The congregation saw him as a man of God, a leader, a devoted husband. But behind closed doors, Malachi was something else entirely. His wife knew it. Naomi was no fool. She knew the man she married. She had one rule: do whatever you want, but don't humiliate me. Don't sleep with someone from the church. She needed her dignity intact. Then came Janelle Carter. 27. Stunning. A voice that made the choir sound like angels. A voice that could bring men to their knees, and a body that made Malachi forget everything: his vows, his wife's words, his reputation. She carried herself differently. She knew men wanted her. And she knew how to use it. Malachi wasn't blind. He noticed her. She noticed him noticing. And then she made the first move. Janelle knew exactly what she was doing. She saw the way his eyes lingered too long, the way his voice softened when he spoke to her. She leaned in when she talked. She let her fingers brush against his when she handed him a hymn book. She played her part flawlessly. At first, Malachi fought it. Or at least, he told himself he did. He convinced himself it was just attraction, that it meant nothing. But Janelle was patient. She kept coming to him for advice, for prayer. She wore dresses that made his mouth dry. She whispered in ways that sent chills down his spine. One night, he gave in. It started with a kiss. A stolen moment in the back of the church after a late-night rehearsal. Then another. And another. Before long, Malachi wasn't just cheating. He was addicted. But this wasn't love. It became an obsession. He didn't just want her. He needed her. She couldn't talk to other men, couldn't be seen with anyone else. One night, as she joked about dating, he grabbed her wrist, leaned in, and whispered. "You are mine. Forever." Janelle laughed. But she didn't love him. She loved the control she had over him. The power. The way he bent his own rules for her. She thought she had control. But she had no idea who she was playing with. Janelle Carter played the game well. Too well. She knew how to make a man feel wanted, how to keep him hooked. Malachi was her security. Her stability. Her easy money. But what Malachi didn't know, what he never even suspected, was that he wasn't the only one. There was another man. Tyrese Vaughn. A former street hustler turned nightclub owner. Young, smooth, with money that flowed like water. If Malachi was power, Tyrese was thrill. He had a reputation, a past that made men respect him and women want him. He didn't walk into rooms, he owned them. Janelle liked that. She liked the danger, the edge, the excitement. She thought she had everything under control. She thought she could juggle two men. One for stability. One for pleasure. And for a while, it worked. She spent Sundays in church, whispering in Malachi's ear. Weeknights in a VIP booth, wrapped around Tyrese. Malachi gave her money, gifts, power in the church. Tyrese gave her fast cars, expensive liquor, and nights she wouldn't forget. She thought she had the perfect setup. She was wrong. Because Janelle didn't just cheat on Malachi, she underestimated him. She forgot who she was dealing with. Malachi wasn't just a man in love. He was a man obsessed. A man who believed in control. And when he found out the truth, he didn't cry. He didn't beg. He planned. How can you be obsessed with a side chick when you have a wife? Drop your opinions in the comments. February 14th, 2023, Valentine's Day. A day meant to be spent with loved ones, a day of celebration, of romance, of appreciation. But for Pastor Malachi Graves, there was only one woman on his mind. And it wasn't his wife. Naomi Graves had been married to Malachi for years. She had played her role, standing beside him as the perfect pastor's wife, the woman who smiled in public despite the loneliness in her marriage. She knew who she had married. She knew about his indiscretions, his wandering eyes, the rumors whispered within the church walls. But she had one rule. Do what you want, but don't ever humiliate me with someone from the church. It wasn't love that kept her in the marriage, it was the respect, the status, the untouchable image of being the first lady. Malachi never planned to spend Valentine's Day with Naomi. He didn't take her out for dinner, didn't write her a heartfelt note, didn't shower her with affection. Instead, he handed her a necklace, expensive and meaningless, a distraction wrapped in a velvet box. She accepted it with a hollow smile, knowing exactly what it meant. It wasn't a gift, it was a transaction. A silent understanding that his attention was elsewhere. Malachi had something special planned for Janelle Carter. A private dinner, candlelight, soft music, the kind of night a man plans for the woman he truly desires. Janelle had made him feel alive again, had given him an escape from the life he felt trapped in. She wasn't just a side piece. She was his. But while Malachi was planning the perfect night, Janelle was in the arms of another man. She had spent the night with Tyrese Vaughn, the man Malachi had no idea existed. While Malachi was calling her, setting up their plans, Janelle was wrapped in satin sheets, whispering promises to another man. She ignored his calls, let them ring, left his messages unread. On Valentine's Day, the man obsessed with her was the last thing on her mind. Malachi kept calling, while she was having fun in a high-end penthouse. By the time Janelle finally answered, it was mid-afternoon. She had already left Tyrese's place, gone home, showered, and gotten herself together. She answered the phone, her voice soft, her tone perfect. "Hey, baby. I'm sorry, I wasn't feeling well. I went to bed early last night." Malachi, relieved to hear her voice, believed her. Or at least, he told himself he did. She was his. She wouldn't lie to him. They agreed to meet for dinner at 7:30 p.m. at an upscale restaurant. It was Malachi's idea, a night to remind her that she belonged to him. When she walked in, he was already there, seated at their table near the window. She looked stunning in a tight red dress, her hair cascading over her shoulders, her lips painted a deep shade of crimson. Every head in the restaurant turned as she walked past. Malachi watched her move, feeling the same hunger he always did. She was his. She leaned in, kissed his cheek, her perfume intoxicating. "Happy belated Valentine's Day, baby. Happy Valentine's Day, my love." The evening went exactly as planned. Wine. Laughter. Small talk. Janelle was playful, twirling her fork, giggling, letting her fingers trail along his hand. She made him feel like a king, and he soaked in every second of it. And then, she made her first mistake. As Malachi poured himself another glass of wine, Janelle's phone buzzed on the table. A small vibration. Nothing loud, nothing noticeable. But Malachi noticed. He always noticed. She glanced at the screen, her lips curling into a soft smile. Malachi watched. She reached for the phone, her manicured fingers tapping a reply. It was fast. Too fast. Too comfortable. And that's when he made his move. He leaned forward, tilting his wine glass toward her, pretending to reach for something on the table. In that split second, as her phone screen lit up in her hand, his eyes caught the message. And just like that, his world shifted. The message that changed everything. "Last night was wild. Let's do it again soon." The words burned into his brain. Janelle didn't realize he had seen it. She was too caught up in the excitement, too reckless. Malachi's grip tightened around the wine glass, his knuckles turning white. She had lied. She had played him. His heart pounded in his ears, but on the outside, he was calm. Too calm. He didn't say a word. Instead, he smiled. "How can you be jealous when you're a married man?" Janelle Carter didn't know it, but this was her last supper. The last meal she would ever enjoy, the last time she would sip fine wine, the last time she would sit across from Malachi Graves and see a man who adored her. She thought she had charmed her way back into his good graces, that she had successfully covered up her betrayal. She had no idea that every word, every touch, every smile was being analyzed, that Malachi already knew the truth. And yet, he played his role perfectly. The moment he saw the message from Tyrese, his world cracked, but his expression never did. Janelle laughed, flirted, ran her fingers along the stem of her wine glass, thinking she had him wrapped around her finger. But Malachi wasn't laughing. Beneath the table, his fists trembled. His nails dug into his palm, his body tight with anger. The weight of betrayal burned through him, but he didn't react. Not yet. Instead, he reached into his pocket, pulling out a small velvet box and placing it on the table between them. "I never got the chance to give this to you earlier." Janelle's eyes widened. Her fingers trembled slightly as she opened the box, revealing an expensive diamond bracelet, catching the candlelight, glittering like a promise. She gasped, her hand covering her mouth. "Oh my God, Malachi, it's beautiful." He leaned forward, his voice smooth, his smile unwavering. "You deserve the best, baby." Janelle beamed. She lifted her wrist, letting him fasten the bracelet around it. She never realized what this truly was. Her last gift. A final token before judgment. A price for her cheating. She thought she had won. She thought she had fooled him. She had no idea that the man across from her, the man who had just given her diamonds, was the same man who had already decided how this night would end. Malachi never forgave liars. Never forgave cheaters. Forgetting that he was no saint himself. Dinner ended, and Malachi insisted on driving Janelle home. She slipped into the passenger seat, still admiring her bracelet, letting the diamonds catch the glow of the streetlights as they drove. She had no idea that this was the last car ride she would ever take. The drive was quiet. Malachi barely spoke, barely looked at her. The storm inside him was growing, but she didn't notice. She was too busy reliving the night, feeling untouchable, believing she had secured her place. Then, he took a detour. Janelle barely noticed at first. It wasn't until the city lights faded, replaced by empty roads and dense trees, that she sat up straighter, frowning. "Where are we going?" Malachi kept his hands on the wheel, his voice calm. "I just need to grab something real quick." A few minutes later, he pulled into a gas station. Janelle watched as he stepped out of the car, walking inside without another word. Inside, CCTV cameras captured every move. Malachi walked straight to the aisle lined with red plastic gas canisters. He picked one up, grabbed a lighter from the checkout display, and paid in cash. Back in the car, he placed the gas can on the floor by his feet. Janelle glanced down, her expression shifting slightly. "What's that for?" Malachi turned to her, smiling softly. "For later." She let out a small laugh, rolling her eyes, assuming he was joking. He wasn't. He put the car in drive, pulled out of the gas station, and kept driving. But this time, he wasn't taking her home. He was taking her somewhere no one would hear her scream. The roads were getting darker. The familiar city lights were gone, replaced by nothing but long stretches of asphalt and the looming shadows of trees on either side. Janelle sat up, her body stiffening, her gut whispering that something wasn't right. She glanced at Malachi, his face calm, too calm. His hands gripped the wheel a little too tight, his knuckles flexing every few seconds. She swallowed. "Malachi, where are we going?" No response. She forced a small laugh, trying to keep her voice light, playful. "Come on, baby, you're scaring me. Just take me home." Still, silence. She reached for her phone, but it wasn't there. Panic crawled up her throat as she patted down her purse, the seat, the floor. Nothing. Then she saw it. Malachi held it up, his fingers wrapped around the sleek black case. He had taken it. She opened her mouth to ask why, then he unlocked the screen with a swipe of his thumb. Her messages. Her eyes widened as he turned the phone toward her, her own words staring back at her. "Last night was wild. Let's do it again soon." Janelle's breath caught in her throat. Malachi's voice was low, steady. "You think I wouldn't find out?" Her heartbeat pounded in her ears, her mind racing for an excuse, a way out, anything to calm him down. "Malachi, listen, you know I love you, but I have my own life. I was never your wife." His grip on the wheel tightened. "You're mine, Janelle. I told you that from the beginning." She shook her head, her voice rising, frustration and fear tangled together. "You won't wife me, and yet you won't let me have a boyfriend?" "Malachi, that's not love. You have Naomi. You have your family. But in the eyes of everyone else, I'm nothing. A secret. A side piece. A wife in the shadows. Malachi clenched his jaw, his voice cold. You knew the rules. I take care of you, I give you everything, and you belong to me. I told you, don't test me. Janelle's eyes burned with anger. You won't accept cheating, but you do it every day. You warned me, Malachi. And what if I warned you? What if I said I'm done being your little secret? He exhaled slowly, shaking his head, his lips curling into something between a smirk and a sneer. You're not done until I say you're done. Janelle's chest tightened. That was when she knew, this wasn't just jealousy. This wasn't just anger. This was possession. And he wasn't letting her go. Janelle's breath came in short, sharp bursts. Her fingers dug into the seat, her pulse racing. She had to get out of this car. Malachi, just let me out. We can talk about this later. Bang. The car jolted as the deafening gunshot echoed in the tight space. A sharp, searing pain exploded in Janelle's shoulder, her body slamming back against the seat as blood poured down her arm, staining her dress. She screamed, her vision blurring, her breath coming in ragged gasps. Malachi, please. But he wasn't done. Not even close. Janelle's body trembled, her vision blurred with pain. Her dress was soaked, part sweat, part blood. The burning ache in her shoulder made every breath feel like a knife to the chest. Malachi sat next to her, gripping the gun, his face blank. Emotionless. Controlled. The same way he delivered Sunday sermons, the same way he held a Bible, he now held a weapon. Janelle knew if she didn't move now, she would never move again. Then she did something he never expected. With all the strength left in her body, she lunged for the steering wheel. The car jerked violently, tires screeching against the pavement. Malachi's grip loosened just enough for her to pull the wheel again, hard. The car veered off the road. Crash. Everything went dark for a second. When Malachi's eyes blinked open, his head was throbbing, warm blood trickling down from a gash on his forehead where he had slammed into the dashboard. His ears were ringing. His vision swayed. Then he realized. Janelle was gone. The passenger door was wide open. Outside, footsteps, unsteady, desperate, running. Malachi staggered out of the car, wiping the blood from his face. His pulse pounded, his breath ragged. And then he saw her. Janelle, barefoot, stumbling through the dirt, running toward the trees. Janelle. She didn't stop. Malachi reached into his coat, pulling out the hunting knife he had bought alongside the gas can. His voice was hoarse, but still carried across the empty night. You made me do this. Janelle didn't look back. She couldn't. She was fighting for her life. But Malachi was faster. The pain in his head didn't matter. The dizziness didn't matter. All that mattered was making sure she never told anyone what had happened tonight. He caught her. And then, the knife sank into her stomach. The sharp, wet sound of metal piercing flesh filled the air. She choked out a gasp, a broken sob. Her hands flew to the wound, her legs giving out. Malachi didn't stop. A second stab, deep into her ribs. Her body jerked, her breath rattling. A third stab, higher, just below her collarbone. Her knees hit the dirt. Then, the final blow, a deep, deliberate slice to her throat. Blood poured from her lips as she collapsed, her body crumpling against the cold earth. Malachi took a step back, his breathing heavy. It was over. But then. A sound. A gasp. Janelle's fingers twitched. Her chest rose just slightly. For the first time all night, he panicked. What was she saying? Was she trying to beg? Was she trying to tell him something? Or, was she trying to name him as her killer? Malachi couldn't take that risk. He raised the knife again. And then, silence. Janelle stopped moving. This time, it was truly over. Malachi stood over her lifeless body, his heart hammering against his ribs. The wind rustled through the trees, carrying the distant sound of passing cars on the highway. Too far for anyone to hear what had just happened. He needed to be smart. Careful. This couldn't lead back to him. His hands were slick with blood, his clothes stained. He reached into the back seat of the crashed car and grabbed the gas canister. The thick, suffocating scent of gasoline filled the air as he poured it over her body. Over her hair, her skin, her clothes. But he wasn't done. He gripped her wrists, dragging her across the dirt. The effort sent a burning ache through his arms, but he didn't stop. He hauled her back to the car, pushing her into the driver's seat. Slumped over. As if she had never left. The lie was almost complete. Janelle wasn't murdered. She stole his car. She had an accident. That's the story he would tell. Malachi pulled out the matchbox, struck a single match. The tiny flame flickered in the darkness, a small, delicate thing. Then, he dropped it. The fire erupted instantly. A roar of heat. A burst of light. The flames swallowed the car, licking at the windshield, curling around the seats, spreading fast. The smell of burnt flesh filled the night air. Malachi stepped back, watching the inferno. By morning, there would be nothing left. No Janelle. No evidence. No proof of what had really happened. He exhaled, slowly pulling out his phone. Then, with a steady hand, he dialed 911. I need to report a stolen vehicle. His voice was calm. Convincing. He thought it was over. He thought he had won. But the fire wouldn't be enough. And by the time investigators were finished, his entire life would be in flames. Malachi walked away from the burning wreck, heart pounding but steps controlled. His hands sticky with dried blood, clothes reeking of gasoline, but he kept moving. He had to get back to town before anyone saw him. His head throbbed from the crash, arms sore from dragging Janelle's body, but he didn't stop. Then, in the distance, blue and red lights. A patrol car. Malachi slowed his pace, forced himself to breathe normally. No sudden moves. No panic. The cop car crept toward him, slowing down. The officer glanced at him, saw the gash on his forehead, the limp in his step. Malachi's chest tightened. Was this it? The officer leaned forward, eyes narrowing, debating stopping. Then, his radio crackled. We got a report of a burning vehicle on the East Road, possible fatality. The cop hesitated. Then, just like that, he hit the gas and sped off toward the fire. Malachi exhaled, hands shaking. He had barely escaped. Hours later, the fire had burned out. Construction workers passing through the area spotted the charred remains of the car, the melted metal, the burnt-out interior. At first, just an abandoned vehicle. Then, they saw the body. Burnt, unrecognizable, but still there. Meanwhile, Malachi played his part. That night, he called Naomi, voice shaky, controlled panic. Baby. I was robbed. Someone took my car. He rushed to the hospital, had his head wound treated, got stitches, wrapped his arm in a bandage. The perfect alibi. A victim, not a suspect. Hours later, he walked into the police station. I need to report my car stolen. He told them the same lie. I parked at a restaurant. When I came back, it was gone. He sat there, wounded, looking like a man who had just had the worst night of his life. And for a little while, the police believed him. It was supposed to be an accident. A stolen car, a tragic fire. But nothing about this crime scene added up. By the time officers arrived, the vehicle was still smoldering, the metal twisted from the intense heat. The interior was charred beyond recognition, the seats nothing more than blackened remains. At first, police assumed it was a case of vehicle theft gone wrong, a stolen car taken for a joyride, crashed, and set on fire to erase the evidence. Then they found the body. It wasn't just burned. It had stab wounds. Deep, fatal wounds that told a completely different story. This wasn't an accident. This was murder. Forensics moved in quickly. A DNA test confirmed the victim was Janelle Carter. A young woman, 27 years old. A member of Pastor Malachi Graves' church. Someone well known in the community. The first question police asked, who would want her dead? The second, why was she found inside a car that had been reported stolen? Police traced the car's registration and found it belonged to Malachi Graves. When they reached out to him, he acted shocked. He told them he had been robbed, his car taken without his knowledge. And that was true, he had called in a theft just hours before. But the issue wasn't the stolen car anymore. The real question was, who stabbed Janelle before she burned? Homicide investigations start with the closest people to the victim. That meant Janelle's love life was the first place they looked. They retrieved her phone records. The device itself had been destroyed in the fire, but the data? That was something the fire couldn't erase. Investigators obtained a court order and pulled her call logs, text messages, and location history. That's when they saw the name that came up the most. Tyrese Vaughn. A former street hustler turned nightclub owner. A man with police records, nothing major, but enough to make him look suspicious. A man who had been texting Janelle regularly. Police took one look at his background and made the call, he was their first suspect. Within 24 hours, officers tracked him down at his club. They cuffed him, brought him in for questioning. Where were you the night of February 15th? Tyrese sat back in the interrogation room, shaking his head. At my club. You can check the cameras. And that's exactly what police did. They pulled security footage, transaction logs, employee statements. Everything lined up. Tyrese had an alibi. He never left the club that night. Now, police had a problem. If Janelle wasn't killed by Tyrese, then who did it? The investigation took a sharp turn when detectives dug deeper into Janelle Carter's call logs and messages. Further investigations through her text history, social media DMs, and recent calls. What they found shocked them. Janelle had been playing a dangerous game. She and Tyrese had been planning to blackmail Malachi Graves. The messages were clear, Janelle wasn't in love with Malachi. She was using him. He thinks I'm his, but I got him where I want him. I'll make him pay. He's weak for me. After this, we're set. He'll keep the money flowing as long as I act right. There were even bank deposits from Malachi's personal account to Janelle's. But there was something more damning. A text from Malachi to Janelle. No one can know about us. If you ever betray me, I swear you'll regret it. Malachi was now at the center of the investigation. The police didn't have proof he killed her, yet. But they knew he had motive. Malachi thought he had covered his tracks. But no crime is perfect. Police needed to confirm his alibi. He had reported his car stolen. He had injuries consistent with an attack. He had walked into the police station like a victim. But technology doesn't lie. They pulled his phone's GPS history. Instead of being at the restaurant, like he claimed, the data placed his phone right at the crime scene at the time of Janelle's murder. Then came the second blow. Police obtained gas station CCTV footage. It showed Malachi walking inside, buying a gas canister, and paying in cash. Still, they needed visual proof that he was at the crime scene. That's when they checked highway surveillance cameras. One clip changed everything. It captured Malachi's car driving toward the isolated road where Janelle was found. And in a brief, blurry frame. His face. Malachi had lied. And now, they had the proof to bring him down. Forensic investigators returned to the crime scene. The fire had done its job, most of the evidence had been reduced to ash. But fire doesn't destroy everything. As they sifted through the wreckage, something caught their attention. A metal object, barely damaged by the flames. They picked it up, brushed off the soot, and turned it over. A watch. A golden wristwatch, with an inscription on the back. To my love, Malachi. Forever, Naomi. The watch belonged to Pastor Malachi Graves. He had lied. There was no stolen car. No random accident. He had been there. And now, they had undeniable proof. Sunday morning. The congregation packed inside the church, waiting for their pastor's sermon. The choir had just finished singing. Malachi stood at the pulpit, Bible in hand, his voice strong as he preached about forgiveness. Then, doors burst open. Cops flooded in. Gasps echoed through the sanctuary. People turned, confused. Whispers rippled through the crowd. Two officers stepped forward. Pastor Malachi Graves, you're under arrest for the murder of Janelle Carter. Silence. Then screaming. Naomi's hands flew to her mouth. The deacons stood frozen. The choir members clutched their robes in shock. Malachi didn't move. Didn't speak. The same way he had stood in front of his congregation preaching the word of God, he now stood before them as a killer. As officers pulled him from the pulpit, his voice was calm. I'm innocent. But his watch. The GPS. The CCTV. The knife. The gas canister. The text messages. They all said otherwise. The courtroom was packed, but the silence was deafening as Naomi Graves took the stand. She had spent years standing beside Malachi, playing the role of the devoted First Lady. She had ignored the whispers, swallowed her pain, endured the humiliation. But when she saw his watch at the crime scene, she knew. He told me the car was stolen. But that was his watch. That was my gift to him. He was there. Malachi sat motionless. No more sermons. No more control. Just a man waiting for his fate. The jury didn't take long. Guilty. Life without parole. The judge's voice cut through the air like a blade. For this crime, you will never see freedom again. Naomi filed for divorce the next day. The church collapsed. The congregation turned their backs. Pastor Malachi Graves, a man who once preached about salvation, was now condemned. Betrayal can break a person. But when a man of God turns into a killer, what does that say about us all? Now, let's talk about it. Do you think Janelle played a dangerous game and lost, or was she just another victim of a possessive man? And what about Malachi? He had a wife, a family, a whole church. Was it just jealousy that drove him to murder, or was this the kind of man he always was? And the biggest question of all, if he hadn't burned the body, would he have gotten away with it? Let me know in the comments. I want to hear what you think. And if you love deep dives into true crime stories, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss a video. Until next